Picture this, you're all set up to make a beautiful batch of melt and pour soap with spa quality perfection. You've got the ingredients ready, the mold prepped, when suddenly disaster strikes and your soap becomes a muddled blob of sadness. Or worse, you pull it out of your mold and your layers break apart into little shards. Frustrating, right? Well, don't worry, I've got your back. In this video, I'm going to go through mistakes I've made and seen other people make with melt and pour soap so that your creation can turn out amazing. Ready? Let's dive in. The first mistake I've seen, and it's super easy to do, and I've done this, is overheat your melt and pour soap. What this will look like is it'll look really innocent, but what happens is the soap bubbles up on the sides, and what's happening is this is actually burning your soap. When your soap cools, it's going to be kind of muddled and cloudy in appearance, and it's going to be a rough texture, and it'll still work like soap, but it's probably not the design you were going for. To avoid this, first cut up your melt and pour soap base into 1-inch cubes. This is going to help your soap base melt more evenly so that little parts of it don't start overheating. And then make sure to melt your soap low and slow on a double boiler or in the microwave using 30-second intervals if you've got a bigger batch. If you're working with a really small amount, only use 5-second intervals and stir it between each interval. Stirring it is going to help distribute the heat because microwaves don't heat things up evenly. So you'll want to pause the microwave, stir it, and then you can keep melting it till it is fully melted or almost completely melted. Then you can take it out of the microwave and stir it. And if there's a little bit of soap that's not quite melted, the heat from the rest of the soap will probably melt that remaining soap to help prevent you from overheating it. If you notice your soap is bubbling up, take it out of the microwave, remove it from the stove, and stir it to distribute the heat. And maybe by stirring it, you'll melt the soap completely. If there's a little bit left that still needs to melt, you can put it back on the heat or back in the microwave briefly and keep an eye on it to make sure it doesn't bubble up. This is especially important with soaps that you're going for a window light clear effect. If your soap bubbles up, it's going to get cloudy and it won't have that beautiful clear design that you had in mind. So make sure to melt your soap slow and low. Next, a common pitfall is adding the ingredients at the wrong time. So if you're adding essential oils, a fragrance, or another additive to your melt and pour soap, you'll want to do this after the soap base has melted and cooled down a little bit. Between 130 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit is usually the best time to do this. This will make sure that your essential oils keep all their good properties. And if you're adding something else, maybe like sugar for some exfoliating benefits or clay, adding it at this temperature is going to keep the sugar from melting and also help the clay from settling to the bottom of the soap. Another mistake is adding too much to your soap, so maybe adding too much fragrance, too much essential oils. If you're adding a tiny bit of carrier oil, adding too much is going to mess up the consistency of your soap. Melt and pour soap is an amazing base that can handle only a certain amount of stuff added to it before it gets weird and stops doing what you want it to be doing. Finally, you got to be patient during the cooling process. Once you've made your soap, take your time taking it out of the mold. The soap is going to cool and solidify from the outside in. So the outside might be all set up and the inside might still be soft. And you don't want to wreck the inside of your soap by taking it out of the mold too early. Take your soap mold and feel it. Make sure that it doesn't feel warm to the touch. You want it to feel room temperature, or if you're cooling it in the fridge, you want the whole thing to feel cool before you take the soap out of the mold. This also applies when you're adding layers to soap. You'll want to make sure that base layer is completely set before pouring the next layer. If you don't, those two layers are going to kind of combine together to create a mottled look. If you're going for a swirled look, this is great. If you're wanting nice sharp layers, you'll want that previous layer to be completely set before pouring the next. And before you pour that next layer, make sure this soap is around 125 to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. If this is too hot, it's gonna melt that base layer and you won't get those clean lines that you're going for. Before you pour the second layer, make sure to spritz that base layer with rubbing alcohol or perfumer's alcohol. That's going to help the layers bind together. It also pops any bubbles that might be hanging out on the surface of your soap. By being mindful of these common mistakes, plus following a few precautions that we went over in this video, your soap is going to turn out great. If you want to perfect your melt and pour soap making game, check out the cheat sheet I have linked in the description box. It's going to give you ingredients, ideas, recipes, and more so that you can master the art of creating with melt and pour soap.